Welcome to the Untold Story podcast, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum. There's so much going on this week, and one of the big stories that we're following really closely is what's happening on the ground in Chicago. And we've been hearing from President Trump that he feels that if the local government isn't able to quell the violence and crime and illegal immigration in Illinois, that he is willing to do that. And he's sending in the National Guard. There's already a lot happening on the ground, but the Guard is only just arriving. So this could get a lot more heated in the days and weeks to come. And we have our Fox News senior correspondent, veteran war correspondent, great all-around guy and fantastic reporter who also just climbed Mount Everest not too long ago. So Mike Tobin, it's great to have you with me today. Thanks for joining me.
You bet. Glad to be here, Martha.
So I always feel with our reporters, I know with our reporters that there's a lot more than what you can pack into a few minutes in any one of your reports. So I want to try to dig into that a little bit. Give me a sense, Mike, of what it's like on the ground. There's been a lot of skirmishes, and we hear what Mayor Brandon Johnson is saying about his police officers and whether or not they're supposed to respond to help ICE when they're being boxed in with cars in the middle of the street. So give us your overall sense of what's going on there.
Well, I think when you talk about the incident with the police officers, I think the rank and file, by and large, are very upset with their leadership right now. They don't really buy the explanation that was given by Larry Snelling yesterday. They thought that he kind of threaded the needle to weave between the politics and mentioned the fact that he thought that the federal agents who were out here could handle themselves. You heard him say kind of contradict what seemed pretty plain and clear in the evidence, that they were ordered to stand down by the patrol chief. He said that there wasn't an order to stand down. Some of the evidence that he offered up was the fact that some 27 Chicago cops got gassed. So they had to be present to be subject to the gas in the Brighton Park area. But there's pretty clear evidence that they were, in fact, ordered to stand down, and they got caught up in the politics. And he got into that, mentioning the fact that they were caught somewhere between the Trust Act and the Welcoming City Ordinance here in Chicago, and the politicians here in Chicago who are backers of the idea of sanctuary cities and not cooperating with federal agents. If you listen to some of the audio in those radio dispatches, he didn't necessarily say stand down, but he said get yourselves within a block or so of the incident and stay put. So it sounds like that Superintendent Snelling is trying as best he can to thread the needle, still back his guys, and make sure that law enforcement backs law enforcement.
Yeah. You know, for those who might not have followed the details of this story, what prompted all this, Mike? How did they get here to the point where these agents, these ICE agents, could have used some backup help from Chicago police officers?
Well, you know about the politics that got us here, but as far as the specific agent or the specific incident, there were a couple of individuals who started tailing the Border Patrol agents. A lot of people say ICE. This specifically was Border Patrol. They started tailing them, rammed their cars, and boxed them in. The agents felt that they were threatened, and you've heard a lot of people higher up saying that they had every reason to feel threatened because a car is a lethal weapon, and they fired in self-defense. There was one woman who was shot and subsequently charged federally for assault on a federal officer, and there was another individual who was picked up in another location and also charged with assault on a federal officer. So that's the incident that led up to it, and after the incident, you have people who start descending on the scene, and slowly but surely that crowd became more angry. The calls went out through those federal agents for help, and then you have all the radio dispatches and the confusion now as to whether the Chicago police were ordered to stand down while the federal agents were in need of help.
So in terms of the backdrop of what's happening with the Border Patrol, you know, who are they rounding up? What are you seeing in terms of what their efforts are on the ground to remove illegal immigrants from Chicago?
Well, I went along with the Border Patrol and that multi-agency effort when they went to the apartment building on the south shore of Chicago. That has come under a lot of controversy. And if you look at what was written in the Sun-Times or the Tribune, they really seem to indicate that they were randomly going into apartments, and that isn't the case. In fact, one of the operational names, the nickname given to that operation, was called Operation Rent is Due, because that apartment building had been swarmed and taken over by squatters. A lot of them Venezuelan. And we saw at least one guy who had a tattoo that is known to be associated with the Tren de Aragua gang. And these squatters were taking over the apartment building. And there's every indication now, I've got from a good source, that the person who tipped the feds off was the building owner himself, because he had so many squatters and so many people from Venezuela that he couldn't get rent from. So the only apartments that the feds went into during that raid were apartments that weren't paying rent. They were populated, but there was no one paying rent. So you did have U.S. citizens who got swept up in that raid. In fact, we know that some U.S. citizens were taken here to the Broadview facility and detained until it could be proven that they were U.S. citizens. But the only apartment buildings that were raided during that now controversial raid were apartments that were squatters. They weren't paying rent.
Yeah, I'm so glad you laid that out. We spent some time in the Dallas office of ICE and spoke with agents there, and they sort of recounted similar circumstances in terms of what drives them to go to a location. It's a case that has been built over the course of some time, and they are seeking specific individuals. There are instances where they may bring in people who are also hanging around that location, who do not have the proper documents and cannot prove that they're in the country illegally, and they may get swept up in those situations as well. I want to play, Mike, because, you know, this has really become about the White House and the administration versus Chicago politicians at this point. It's a real standoff. And we're going to get to the National Guard in a minute because they're just arriving. So this is a situation that may get a lot more heated than it is right now. But politically, it played out a bit on Capitol Hill today as the Attorney General Pam Bondi was answering questions. It's part of the oversight responsibility of Congress. Answering questions from United States senators. This is Dick Durbin questioning Pam Bondi. And of course, he is a senior, very long time Illinois senator. Let's watch.
Were you consulted by the White House before they deployed National Guard troops to cities in the United States?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House.
What's the secret? Why do you want to keep this secret?
Yeah, Chairman, as you shut down the government, you voted to shut down the government, and you're sitting here, our law enforcement officers aren't being paid. They're out there working to protect you. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And currently, the National Guard are on the way to Chicago. If you're not going to protect your citizens, President Trump will.
Pretty heated back and forth, and it went on longer than that. Mike, your reaction to that as a reporter who has been on the ground a lot and who sees this political situation and tensions that exist?
Well, it doesn't seem that the political tension is going to subside anytime soon. And you have the left playing to that to their constituency here and really playing up the idea that random people are going to be snatched off the street. And we just had that discussion that there are specific targets that they go after. And the political temperature isn't coming down anytime soon. In fact, I see, particularly from Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson, they seem to get more emotional with every press conference, every communication. And in fact, if you look at X right now, Governor Pritzker has just posted a threat to withdraw from the National Governors Association if they don't back him in his stance against Trump and deployment of the Guard. So the temperature is not coming down anytime soon, and I think that was evidence in the hearing you saw on Capitol Hill this morning.
So the clashes that we've seen, Mike, just to be specific, have been between the Border Patrol and the population, people who are protesting their presence and the removal orders that they're carrying out on the ground. But now you have National Guard coming in from Texas, and these are on orders of President Trump to come in and to help to restore order to the streets of Chicago. Is there a need for order to be restored on the streets of Chicago in terms of what the residents there tell you? And what can we expect once the Guard is in place?
Well, that's the question. Once you deploy the Guard, what do you do with them? It looks like their orders so far are to protect federal property and federal personnel. Here at the Broadview ICE facility, this is one of the locations where you see clashes almost every day. You can see the fencing behind me, which has become controversial, and that was just used to push the protesters away from the building that ICE is using to process these detainees once they take them in. Also, when you put them out on the street, when they have missions, you could use the National Guard to protect the personnel. One of the things you can see as you differentiate the different agencies, ICE usually operates with a very specific target, a specific warrant, an individual that they're after. And as you mentioned, a lot of times they go inside, say, a residence, and there are other people there. Well, they check them and they'll detain them until they can prove whether or not that individual is legal. Border Patrol has been a little more loose. They have done things like walking around the city of Chicago, and you've seen some of the videos when they came across that cyclist who said that he was illegal in the United States, and they attempted to chase him down. Things like that. So the Border Patrol, we'll see. They may be out on their own, but the role of the Guard seems to be from the White House is to protect federal property and personnel. I don't think you could have the National Guard just out on the south side of Chicago, which is so troubled, because what will they do? They don't necessarily have the power to arrest people, and otherwise they would just be sitting ducks, because in those areas on the south side and the west side, you have a lot of these young gangbangers who might just shoot somebody for sport.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gangs. The Latin Kings put out a bounty, $2,000 for information on Greg Bovino, who is one of the top-ranking Border Patrol officials, and $10,000 if someone shot him. I mean, it's a pretty stunning, specific hit that was put out there on Greg Bovino, who was just on a little while ago, and people can take a look at the video from America Reports of that interaction. He said, "We're not going anywhere. We're not going to be threatened by this." Talk to us about the gang presence in Chicago and your reaction to the specific nature of that threat against this border official.
$10,000 to take him down was the specific language in that. And when it comes from a gang like the Latin Kings, you have to take it seriously, because the black gangs are different than the Latin gangs in Chicago. The black gangs are a lot of kids. They're fractured into cliques. It's not uncommon to have the black disciples fighting another clique from the black disciples. But the Latin Kings and the other Latin gangs, if you remember during COVID and some of the riots, they actually took over some of the neighborhoods and protected the local businesses. They're cohesive and they have leadership. And this individual, Juan Espinoza Martinez, at least according to the federal documentation, is a ranking member of the Latin Kings. So when he puts out a message on Snapchat, you know that people are reading it. And it's the kind of thing that you have to take seriously, because they do have respect, they do have leadership. And if you have a high-ranking person within the Latin Kings and he puts out a command, there are going to be people who will listen to it. And one of the things we know about the Latin gangs is they don't just carry handguns. The Latin gangs have operated with long guns, so they can have some precision in their fire.
So Governor Pritzker has asked for the thugs to get out of Chicago, referring to U.S. law enforcement. Talk to us about Pritzker. Right. How politically, how strong is he in the state of Illinois? There's discussion about him potentially running for president in the next presidential election. Right. Give people sort of a lay of the land where it comes to how popular he is and how those statements would be received by people in Chicago and in Illinois, I should say.
Well, yeah, Illinois would be the bigger question, but politically, if I may offer my opinion, this is the best thing that ever happened to Governor Pritzker. He wants to go up against Gavin Newsom, who is popular. He's better looking. One of the things you may notice about Governor Pritzker is that he's been losing a lot of weight because he knows the superficial part. There's a superficial part of running for office, and he's playing that game. To have him to have the opportunity to stand for something and say that he's standing for a group of people is worth working rather well for him. But the problem is it's working only with his constituency. If you remember, a lot of times Illinois, well, it would be something if they would elect a Republican governor in Chicago, but Republican mayor in Chicago. But Republican governors are not uncommon in Illinois because you have the population of Chicago and then you have the rest of the state. And the rest of the state, it's kind of like if you leave the population centers in Wisconsin, you go into Trump land. It's a little bit more conservative as you get out into the rural parts of the state, the parts where people make the food.
Last question for you, as someone who recently scaled Mount Everest, and then you did, I think it was 22 push-ups on top of Mount Everest. Explain to us the significance of that number, why you did the climb, and what you think as you look at the video of these people who are trapped in a snowstorm up there right now, Mike.
Well, I did the climbing. I did the push-ups on top as a symbol for the veterans. But I did the climb. Like, to be honest, I did it because I wanted to do it. The motivation was selfishness. As for the people who are on the mountain right now, let's switch from pessimism to optimism. I think those people who are trapped on the mountain right now, they should have cold weather gear with them because they're on Mount Everest. They should have access to fuel for their stoves, so therefore they can melt snow and make water. It's a miserable task. No one likes making water when you're on the mountain. You're always trying to pass it off on someone else, but they can do it. And they should have good, ample supply of food because they're close to their camps. So I think there is a reason to be optimistic for those people who are trapped on Everest right now because they're not up in the death zone. The clock isn't ticking. They can stay there for a long time. They should have access to food and water. I see a scenario where everyone gets down from this blizzard on Everest. The biggest risk, I would say, is frostbite injuries. You could come down without all your fingers and toes, and you get a frostbite injury. That's a life-changing injury. Yeah,
tell me about the pack animals with the long horns that we see in that video that are carrying some of their gear back and forth. It's quite a sight, Mike. Tell us about that.
The yaks. You got to use yaks up there. They're the indigenous animals, and they're cranky. They're not as nice as cows. You load up your yaks and you get away from them.
Mike Tobin, thank you very much. If I were stranded on Mount Everest, I would want you to be there to help me figure out how to get a water supply and pretty much everything else, I'm pretty sure. Mike, thank you so much. Great to talk to you today. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Good to talk to you, too.